Hey guys, it's Graham. What's crackin'? Captain a la Triste. This is a book series by Spanish author Arturo Pérez y Reverte. It's set in the 1600s in Spain at the peak of what they call El Siglo del Oro, the golden age, the golden century. It's when they were really at the height of their powers, right before their decline began, and other powers started to rise up in the West. The main character, the titular character, is Captain Alatriste himself, Diego Alatriste y Tenorio. But the focal character, the books are told through the first-person perspective of his young student, his apprentice, if you will, Íñigo Balboa. This first book takes place more or less in 1622 or 1623, but they're written as memoirs. Íñigo is telling the story of his childhood. His father, Lope Balboa, was a comrade at arms with Diego Alatriste during the Flanders Wars. This was, I think they called them the Flemish Wars. There are words that he uses for these places that are, old in Spanish and don't really refer to places by their current names today. This was one of the struggles that I had when I first read this book in 2006, even though I had been a Spanish speaker for half my life at that point, and I had just spent 2 years living in Eastern Spain. Because they are written in the dialect of the time and they use period-appropriate vocabulary, these are words that I never really had a chance to encounter in everyday life. And so I can show you here, as I was reading it, I'm going through it and underlining words the entire time so that I can look them up later and just trying to skate by on context. Later, I would grab an English copy of the first novel and read through it and realize why I had a hard time understanding it. It's because it's written in very classical, flowery prose. But before I get too far down that rabbit hole, let's tell you about the story itself. So like I said, Íñigo Balboa, his father was a comrade with Diego during the wars against, I think they were Lutheran separatists. The Spanish Catholics just referred to them as heretics. But in the Spanish Netherlands, there were wars. Spain went, knocked the wars out, and came back. And suddenly in Madrid in the 1620s, you had a surplus of veterans looking for work. All the military-aged men came back, and labor suddenly became cheap, and that has an effect on the economy. We've seen that happen off and on for the last 20 years during the global war on terror here in America. So after Lope died back in Spain, suddenly his widow had a couple of extra mouths to feed, and so she sends her oldest son to go live with Diego Alatriste in Madrid, sending a letter saying, hey, my husband saved your life once, you said you'd pay him a debt, I need you to, teach my son a trade and take him under your wing because this is my economic situation. Íñigo says that he doesn't think that his mother really knew what Diego did for a living. She just assumed that, a man of his skill and his former rank, even though he wasn't actually a captain, would be able to find work. Well, he could, but it was not easy to come by. When Íñigo shows up in Madrid, Diego is just getting out of a 3-week stint in debtor's prison where he was kind of able to get by on the support of his friends. He had people bringing him food and, helping him to kind of wait out his time there. He's a man with some battle scars on him. And he's got his flaws, he's got his faults, but the one thing that he has that he never goes back on and never betrays is his honor. In fact, the opening line of the book is the one that he's best known for writing. He says, "No era el hombre más honesto ni el más piadoso, pero era un hombre valiente." He wasn't the most honest man or the most pious, but he was brave. There are certain areas where his honor is never compromised, though. And we'll see how that unfolds as Íñigo tells the story of his first couple of weeks there with Diego in Madrid. Because he's hard up for cash, he'll take whatever job comes his way, and he's a swordsman for hire. Sometimes there will be creditors that need a debtor to make good on a payment, or there will be a cuckolded husband who wants Diego to scare off his wife's paramour, and Diego will do it. He's not afraid to rough somebody up. He's good with a sword. He's good with I don't know the name for this type of blade in English. It's called a vizcaína. It's a dagger that he keeps behind his back, and there's a very particular sword fighting style where you've got the sword up and the vizcaína here. It's your offhand weapon. It's period appropriate. But he's very handy with these things, and so he puts those skills to use when he can, and that's when he gets, that's how he gets paid. Well, he's in one of these spells where he's really hard up for money. He did just get out of debtor's prison, and he's approached by not necessarily a friend, but an associate, Martin Saldana, who's the local constable. That's an equivalent of a sheriff. Says, hey, I know somebody who would want to hire your services. Come meet with this guy at this place at these late hours, and we'll see what he has to say. Diego shows up along with an Italian man with a similar skill set. His name is Gualterio Malatesta. And lo and behold, they are hired by the Catholic Church to attack a couple of Englishmen that will be passing through Madrid in the late hours and rough them up, scare them off, make sure they leave town. Well, then the Catholic priest or friar or official who hires him and just tells him only rough them up, he leaves, and suddenly an official from the Inquisition shows up and says, yeah, we're going to change the deal a little bit. Don't just rough them up. You got to kill this one guy. He's got something on him. Take it, bring it back. That changes the calculus a little bit, and later when Diego and Gualterio are waiting in this alley for these two Englishmen to come travel through, Diego's kind of replaying his past engagements and counting the people that he actually has killed and which ones were avoidable, which ones were not, which ones were justified, things like that. And as he's stewing over this is kind of putting him in a mood to reevaluate, renegotiate the contract in his mind, which is not something that you do when the Spanish Inquisition is involved. But as he and Gualterio attack these two Englishmen as they're traveling through, something about it sets him off. His gut senses tell him, don't do this. And so rather than finish off these Englishmen, he turns his blade against Gualterio Malatesta and he's like, this is wrong. Something's not right here. You leave, I'll take care of this. He just put a target on his back. He helps these two Englishmen come to find out that one of them is the Duke of Wales, the Prince of Wales. He's a member of the royal family, and he's traveling there in secret to marry a princess in Spain. The Catholic Church had an interest in preventing that because they were Catholics, the English were Anglicans, and therefore they were heretics, and they would be damned if they were going to have a heretic prince marry their Catholic little princess. And so they hired these two swashbuckling swordsmen to rough him up and kill him. The Inquisition was the one that wanted to go for the execution order. These were apparently two different bodies under the larger umbrella of the Catholic Church, and they were at odds, and that's why the Inquisition wanted to make this move without the higher-ups within the church knowing, and yada, yada, yada. Alatriste didn't want to kill an innocent man, and especially doesn't want to now that there's royalty involved, but se ha metido en un buen lío esta vez, as they say. Like, you really stepped in it this time. He takes the prince and his assistant, and they go to a local powerful friend of his, Guadal Medina, who is kind of like the postmaster general, which is not necessarily an equivalent to how we think of it now 400 years later in the Americas. But it was a very powerful and connected political position, and there was a lot of money attached to it. He was a good friend to have in your back pocket in an emergency like this. The guy does what he can, but Diego won't tell him the entire story because it would require him to break confidences that he swore not to break. He's kind of dancing around his own personal moral code here, trying to do what he feels is right without making the situation even worse. And, telling this guy that, yeah, by the way, I was working for the Inquisition, and by the time I had already accepted a job from the church, then the Inquisition came in and wanted to change the deal and blah, blah, blah. Like, it gets messy. As I said, this is all told from the perspective of Inigo, but he's writing it as a memoir kind of at the end of his life. And so you just have to figure that, Diego told him these details later on. He's writing them down as he knew them. There are times when he'll chime in, he'll editorialize a little bit and say, at this point I was in Diego's apartment above the local brothel where he lived. And I was only 13. I was learning how to handle a sword or something, and he was off doing manly swashbuckling espadachín type things. Espadachín is a sword fighter. Anyway, now that he's got a target on his back, he knows that there are going to be people coming after him to kill him, that the Inquisition is going to send people after him, especially since news travels fast that there's English royalty in town and that he's here to court and woo and marry our lovely Spanish princess. The Inquisition didn't want the masses knowing that. They wanted that prevented quietly. This whole thing's blown up in their face. Of course, they're going to take it out on the guy that made all that happen. There's a wonderful scene at a local play where the king and his guests, the the English prince and his assistant, are also there watching this play. And while Diego is there in the crowd, a couple of guys start moving around him, and they start making a stink, telling him every couple of minutes, turning around and going shh, 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 like shushing him as if he's talking. They're creating the public spectacle of an offense so that then they can turn their swords on him and make it look like they were just having a fight with a guy in the stands. And oops, we accidentally killed this dude who a couple of powerful people happen to know is in the middle of all this. Well, since the English prince feels that there's a life debt to Diego for having not killed him, but hey, it was there, he jumps down from the stands and gets in the middle of the fight with these guys that are trying to attack Diego, even though Diego's got a couple of friends who are able to join in, but it's like 5-on-2, 5-on-3. The odds are not in his favor. But with this member of the English royalty jumping in to save him, okay, this thing just keeps snowballing and getting bigger and bigger and getting out of control. He finally ends up in an interrogation room with the king's right-hand man, who gets to the bottom of the situation and is able to kind of give Diego a bit of a, we'll say, a clean bill of health with regard to the Inquisition and stuff, getting them off of his back, because now they can't make any public moves against him without pissing off the king. And he's able to do it while keeping his honor intact. He doesn't give away anything that he really was not supposed to from that interview where he and Gualterio Malatesta were hired. He even though he was not the most honest man, he does still have his honor, which I think there's a vagabond's distinction, we'll say. But he sticks to his code. His friends are loyal to him. There's a woman who loves him, and there's a student who is buddingly loyal and faithful to him and admires him and wants to grow up to be just like him. I think he's a representative man of his era, of his time, to the extent that I'm familiar with it. That was one of the other obstacles that I had when I was reading this book, was that I didn't know a whole lot about the specifics of Spanish history from this time period. As you can see, anything in the 1620s that I'm familiar with historically is going to be more under the umbrella of the Mayflower than of the Spanish crown. But it's one thing that I've since come to appreciate about these books that Perez has written, because they show that time period. They really bring it to life in a vibrant way. Reading the book in English definitely helped me to get a better grasp of what was going on. There were times when I would try to read this in Spanish and it would just make me fall asleep because it was so mentally exhausting trying to absorb so many new words. And you can see by kind of the paragraph blocks here that he's a big fan of these run-on sentences, because he attaches long strings of flowery prose together, and then you throw in dialogue tags, you throw in words that I don't know. It throws me off. So I would recommend, if you are interested in a series like this, trying it out in English, even if you do have a familiarity with the Spanish language, because that is going to be an obstacle. So I'm going to go on and read the rest of the series in English, and then finally get around to to reading these ones that I picked up at FNAC in 2005. Geez, yeah, there's 2005, Graham, for you. Lots changed. The second book is called Limpieza de Sangre. In English it's called Purity of Blood. Limpieza means cleanliness. It's because those two words, pureza and limpieza, would have kind of different connotations. It was about, I believe the second one was about somebody who had Jewish blood, and that was something that they took into account as whether you were of pure stock or not. There was religious implications. With El Sol de Breda. Breda was I believe it was a place in the Spanish Netherlands. I think by the time this book happens, Inigo is an adult and he goes to the Spanish Netherlands with Diego, who has to go back for another one of the Flemish Wars. El Oro del Rey, the Gold of the King. And then this fifth one here, which is the longest one in the series so far, is El Caballero del Jubón Amarillo. It's I can't remember the word they use in English for it. Caballero can mean three different things. It can be cavalier, it can be horseman, it can be gentleman, it can be knight. I think it's the cavalier in the yellow doublet is what it's called, but I haven't gotten that far in the series. And then if I'm not much mistaken, there's at least one more, maybe two more that he's written in there. So I bought a fair amount of books to read as I was on my way out of the country in 2005. I've got the entire Lord of the Rings series in Spanish. I still haven't finished The Hobbit in Spanish. That's another one that, even though it's not written in Old English, it's written in a very elevated classical style of English, and that makes the Spanish just a little bit slower for me to absorb, because most of my familiarity is with conversational day-to-day stuff. In Alcoy, somebody gifted me a copy of the 5th Harry Potter book in Spanish, and I hadn't read any of them at that point. It's kind of why I went on to read the whole series in English, so that I could turn around and read it in Spanish. That one was a lot better because I hadn't read anything in that foreign language. So working my way through like a middle grade aged kids book was a lot better. And then I think I've got the entire Hunger Games series in Spanish. I've got a lot of books in Spanish that are helping me to at least retain and not lose so much now that I'm stateside and have been for 18 years. It's important for me to retain that, and finding stuff about Spain written by native Spanish authors is one of the things that I've come to enjoy since then. And so, like I said, I've taken a couple of runs at this one. Reading it in Spanish in 2006 was hard. Reading it in 2008 in English was better. I just reread it recently. I grabbed the audiobook. It's narrated by Scott Brick. And I just remembered what it was that I loved about it. There's a very vibrant cast of characters. They're all very like españoles puro y duro. There's one character named Bartolo Cagafuego, which if you speak Spanish, you know why his last name is funny. There's another zinger in there where one of his friends, who's a drunkard who hangs out at the local tavern, whenever he's cussing out a group of vagabonds or ragamuffins or whatever you want to call them, there's this expression. He says, "Hijos de algo sin duda, pero con dudas hidalgos." The word hidalgo, it was a fabrication of the noble class when they were basically extending their authority to people that they wanted to be representatives of them in distant lands. People who were of the lower classes back in a class stratified society. They didn't want to endow them with nobility, or maybe they couldn't, but they could say, okay, I'm going to give you this rank of hidalgo so that you are able to act in my name. Hidalgo is a portmanteau of hijo de algo. It's just a car crash of that word. It literally means like you're a son of something. You have this vague connection to something that gives you the nobility necessary to carry out these works for me. So hidalgo, it means son of something. But the way that expression is used, hijos de algo sin duda, it's like saying like you're an SOB, you're a son of something or other, like as a way of profanity. Doubtless you're an SOB, but with doubts are you a hidalgo? You doubtless have a connection to being an SOB, but with doubts do you have any connection to nobility? You see how much longer it takes to explain that in English, but if you have at least that level of familiarity with the Spanish, there are these flourishing turns of phrase that really bring the text to life a lot more. It's challenging for me as a reader, but it's also very rewarding in the end. So, but I can tell you that the English translations of that at least are able to get the general sentiment of what they're saying and what's going on, and the prose is very beautiful. I don't know who does the translations for the English text, but they did a very good job. So I give a hearty recommendation for Captain a la Triste by Arturo Pérez y Reverte, and I think content-wise there were a couple of swear words. It drops an F-bomb in it a few times. That was another thing that kind of confused me, because in Spanish technically there are like 3 different ways of saying the F word. And the one that he uses in Spanish, I think, is jorobar, which was not a word that I heard very often in Spain. And believe me, like, they're not bashful about using their profanity over there. It's not one that I heard very often, but it kind of expresses that sentiment of like, no me jorobes would be like, don't mess with me, don't screw around with me. But he goes straight for like the level 5 word in English. So I'm not sure if that's meant to exactly translate that way, but again, we're dealing with men who live on the rough edge of life and don't exactly hold back with their words. So that's there. Other than that, yeah, hearty recommendation, so go check it out. As for the rest, you guys know the drill. If you want to support the video, click like, leave a comment, share, do all that stuff. And if you want to support the channel, you can go to my Substack, crackerstack.substack.com, and become a paid subscriber. I do more of my book reviews there weekly, and I'm also posting paywalled content where I'm doing chapter by chapter breakdowns of old manuscripts that I've worked on in the past and that I might revitalize later on. So Thanks for watching this far. Hope you guys like the series. If you've already read it, let me know what you think. Until next time, drive safe. See you out there.